Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Nicole Greco, your moderator for today. It is my pleasure to introduce today's program, Turning Data into Actionable Insights, Business Intelligence for Professional Services, with Talon's Senior Director, Adam Warbeck. And now it's over to you, Adam, to get us started.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Just before we get into the meat of the presentation, a little bit about our firm. So Talon is also a professional services firm. We consult around building connected and data-driven firms. What do we mean by that? Well, there's kind of three pillars to being connected and data-driven, we believe. It starts with data and analytics, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Then you kind of move up into more of the unstructured data in your company or connecting to people, expertise, higher level things. And obviously that gets delivered through mediums like portals and collaboration tools. And then underneath the covers of all that, it's plumbing, but it's a necessary thing. And integration is a big part of any firm, whether you're integrating systems inside of your company or integrating with business partners. And we've had an opportunity to work for some prestigious law firms and consulting firms in helping them drive towards these goals. So just diving into the world of data, I'm sure everybody on the call has heard the word big data, probably heard it a couple times even today. Arguably at this point it's so watered down and such a commodity term, but if you really take it at heart, you think big data. Most firms, unless you're Amazon, Netflix, pharmaceutical or biotech company mapping the human genome, you may think, hey, I don't have big data. But if you really look under the covers, big data is more about, or not just about volumes of data. It also could be things like velocity of data, meaning data streams that are coming in from sensors, or the last V, a variety of data. And I would argue that every firm, regardless of size, any sort of sustainable business has a variety of data. You can think of this as something as seemingly, for the IT guys as logs of your intranet portal. All the activity on your intranet when people are searching for documents, when your attorneys or partners in the firm are looking for a particular document, and potentially not finding what they're looking for. All of that is being tracked in those log files. Well, what if we can analyze them and potentially uncover the more valuable pieces of content inside of your company, or disregard some of the less valuable content, and then next time when somebody's going to start on a new project or a new matter, potentially surfacing the most valuable documents relevant to what they're working on. There's a lot of opportunity within those bits and bytes of data, and so I wouldn't dismiss big data just because you're not a big firm. And on the other side of the spectrum is obviously taking this concept that is only for those of us really passionate about it and making something of the data and surfacing it wherever the business is, whether it's on their mobile device, or the example I like to use is think about the movie recommendation engine inside of Netflix, right? If somebody non-technical, your grandmother, your mother logs into Netflix and the software or the site is predicting, hey, you may want to check this movie out. We think you'll like it. Nobody sits there and thinks about, what kind of algorithms went into preparing that recommendation. They just take it at face value, and next time they have a few hours to kill, they go watch the movie. And it's really about taking data and to make it actionable insight, we believe is really about making it that simple, putting something in front of an end user that really there's not going to question, or be intimidating. They're just going to take it and they're going to be better because of the recommendation, and they're going to move forward. And we're not the only ones saying this. You can see Gardner definitely as soon as next year, 2015, are predicting that those companies that are not taking advantage of analyzing and making more out of the data that they have as an asset are going to be falling behind to those peers that are doing that. So it's important to keep in mind. For our conversation today, everybody I think has heard the word BI or business intelligence over the years, and it's certainly evolved beyond BI into a very sort of broad and rich tool set that takes us, as I was saying earlier, from data to insight, and then ultimately into the actions that the business users can take on that data. So from the blue circle here and kind of going clockwise, the blue would arguably be for those data scientists, the few sort of eccentric individuals that want to have these conversations with the data. and understand where it comes from, and are working to put it together for the benefit of the rest of the company. Once they do, and that could very well be a partner like Talon doing that for you. But once they do, we're moving up into the insight circle, the orange one. And here we're taking that refined data. So we took raw data, turned it into something a little bit more refined. And we're giving business analysts, people that essentially know Excel and maybe somewhat technical, but more importantly, they have business acumen. They're subject matter experts over a particular domain, and giving them tools that they can understand, that they're familiar to them, like Excel, and being able to analyze that data very easily and gather some sort of insight out of it. And then with that nugget of gold, and it doesn't happen every time. I think it's important to say that this type of work, analytics and data mining, is certainly not a 10 for 10. Every time you try, you're going to win. It actually might be as low as a 1 for 10, meaning you have to try 10 times, 9 times you'll fail, and 1 time you'll strike gold. But that gold that you'll strike is going to be so valuable that it'll pay for the 9 failed attempts. Well, we're giving these subject matter experts the ability to crunch through data, generate that insight, and then move it on into the business users so they can act on it. So an example of this, think about your utility company, for example. So we had a conversation with a water utility recently where they're crunching all the data, in this case a velocity and a volume of data from the water meters that are being read every hour, and looking for potentially people that may be stealing water. And to their surprise, after doing some analysis, they discovered that laundromats, of all things you wouldn't think, but laundromats were actually kind of infamous for turning back their water meters and tampering with them. Who's to believe that a laundromat doesn't need water to wash people's clothes, but these guys were trying to get away with it. So going from insight into action in this case is being able to go from the subject matter expert, the analyst crunching through the data, and being able to hand it over in a consumable way to a field agent who may go out to the customer, open up the water meter, take pictures, and document that it was in fact tampered with, and that would then cause a new bill to be issued to the customer. So that's the kind of action we're talking about, and again, something that gets us far, far away from the bits and bytes of data to something very consumable by a non-technical person. Now, for today's session, we're going to focus on the orange circle, really assuming that we have good data coming to us, and we're not really focused on hypothesizing about what actions we're going to take on the data. We're just really here to look at the tools, these familiar tools like Excel that can enable a subject matter expert to be able to generate some of this insight. So the way this works, and this is all kind of under the Power BI for Office 365 umbrella that Microsoft has dubbed their product, but there's really two sides to this. On the left here in the green, you'll see Excel. So the idea here is that Excel, obviously a franchise of Microsoft's, and arguably the world's favorite BI tool. I mean, regardless of what other tools you may have deployed, whether they're mega vendor products like MicroStrategy or Cognos or SAP, or more niche products like ClickView or Tableau, there's always the export to Excel feature in every one of those. And so at the end of the day, despite all the energy and work that goes into preparing reports on any of these platforms, the end user, or many end users, often end up exporting their data to Excel. However, what happens with those approaches is that data is then disconnected. You have a copy of it, and if you ever want to go repeat the exercise, you oftentimes have to redo all the steps, and there's a lot of error-prone risks that can happen on the way. The other side of this, the right-hand side in the orange, is the SharePoint element. So once you're done working inside of Excel and you have a piece of analysis or a report or a dashboard that you've created and you want to share it with other people, the beauty of the SharePoint element is that you can upload it to a SharePoint server, in this case SharePoint running in the cloud on SharePoint Online and Office 365, and anybody with a web browser is able to then view that, assuming you give them access and you have the security in place to do that. So you no longer need the end users or the next person down the chain to have the latest version of Excel. They don't even have to have Excel at all installed. They're able to interact with the report that you created through the web browser. So we're going to start by looking at Excel first. There are a number of pieces inside of Excel that enable you to do this analysis. First, it starts with discovering data. Everybody's used to searching for things these days, right? Google and Bing have kind of spoiled us in the sense that, you're looking for something, you type in your phrase, and usually very quickly the thing you're looking for pops up on the first or second page of the results. And so, we're kind of taking the same approach here with data and access to data. Why have to remember where the data was? Why have to remember what server it was on, or what system it was coming out of, or how to potentially connect to that system, when we can leverage something like search and be able to access both public data, which is available from sources like Dun & Bradstreet, heck, even Wikipedia has some valuable data at some point that we might want to pull in, but more importantly, corporate data. So if somebody has published a query that they've worked on before, it only needs to be done once, and then everybody else can benefit. So through this search interface, you are able to type in a query and search for a piece of data. So any of us on the call that have people that they manage probably have run a report around timesheets once in a while. So wouldn't it be great to be able to type in timesheet, hit search, and find our corporate timesheet data, and I don't have to remember what system it came out of or how to connect to it. It just comes and pops up for me. Once I have my data, I'm able to load it into Excel. What's changed here is there's a product or a feature called PowerPivot underneath the covers, and where historically Excel, although it's a spreadsheet, has been used to dump as many rows of data as people wanted to into it. It wasn't really a good data integration tool. It wasn't meant to be that. It was a spreadsheet. So there was always a limit. In 2003, it was a 65,000 row limit. In 2010 or 2007, it went up to a 1 million row limit. But regardless of the limit, it was never enough. So what's happened here is PowerPivot is a data model that lives within Excel. And so now when you're loading data into Excel, you load it into PowerPivot. It's able to handle hundreds of millions of rows of data. It's really just limited by the amount of memory that's on the computer that you're using. And it's not to say that you want to load every last bit of data that you can find into one Excel workbook. But the idea here is that in some cases you have a particular type of analysis you're doing, and it's up to the technology to support whatever analysis that you are trying to do. Now, once you dump it in here, you're oftentimes going to be pulling in data from a number of disparate systems or sources, maybe, as we were doing in the Discover section here, public and corporate data. And you're going to want to relate that data, and this tool gives you the ability to make those relationships. And once you do make those relationships, now they're available to be leveraged by anybody doing any kind of visualization or further exploration of the data. So in terms of visualization, there are a couple of capabilities. Again, all these tools or all these features are prefixed with the word Power, hence the Power BI brand. This particular one is called PowerView. So this is a very kind of high fidelity and animated dashboard or report building tool. So in this case, you're able to see the fields on the right hand side, and all those fields are coming from that PowerPivot model that we just talked about, and you're just able to drag them over into the canvas and start to build your visualizations. And if you look in the upper left of that screenshot, if you can see it, you can easily switch to different kinds of visualizations. So going from a table to a bar chart or a line chart is very simple to do, and we're going to have demos of this coming up in a second where we'll walk you through and just show you how easy it is. And then the last step, the exploration of data, especially if you have the ability to collect some geographically focused data, and it doesn't have to be latitude and longitudes. It can be, as you'll see in a little bit in the demo, something as simple as zip codes or states and cities. And if you have that information within your data, you're able to visualize it on a map like this, and see patterns or discover insights that potentially you wouldn't be able to tell or easily see by just looking at a grid of data. So with that introduction, I'm going to jump over to Excel and show you guys how this was all put together. So when doing a demo like this, especially around analytics and data, it really helps to have a context and make that context as relevant as possible for the people observing the demo. Obviously on a webinar like this, everybody's from a little bit of a different subset of professional services. But I think any of us can understand how a law firm works, even if you don't work for one. It is really about working on matters instead of projects for clients. And so in our fictitious law firm here, just to kind of set the stage, I have 3 offices. I have a main office, which happens to be in New York City. I have a southeast office, which I believe is down in Miami, and a southwest office out in San Diego. And I have data for 3 years, 2011, 2012, and 2013. And what this pivot table is doing is in column C, summing the revenue, and D, counting up the matters that we've worked on for clients, and in E, we always want to keep an eye on our average rate and see how that's trending. So everything you see here on the screen is traditional Excel. This is a pivot table. Pivot tables have been in Excel for well over a decade. So anybody that's worked in Excel has built a pivot table. And over on the right-hand side is a pivot table field list, which everybody's familiar with, and you can simply just drag and drop fields from the field list over onto the pivot table. But the interesting piece that we want to focus on here is how this was put together. And it started with access to the data, and that's really where PowerPivot came in. So I'm going to click over here to the PowerPivot tab at the top, and over here on the left-hand side is a button called Manage Data Model. When I click this, the data model window pops up. In this window for PowerPivot, I'm able to source the data that I want to put into my model. And so you can see the interface is very similar to Excel. You're actually still inside of Excel, even though it's a separate window. Down the bottom here are the tabs, just like you have sheets of data in Excel. However, the interesting thing about this, or the important thing, is that none of this is editable. At this point, this data is here for analysis and reporting, and so this is not where I would edit or make changes to the data. If I wanted to make changes, I would have to go into the system that this is imported from and make the change in there. Now, that's not to say that it has to come from a database. There's actually a number of places to get data from in here. So I'm in the table imports. Let me just cancel out and show you how I got here. So up here in the ribbon again, get external data, you can see a number of ways to get data into PowerPivot. And if I hit from other sources, this is actually the full list here. You can see Microsoft products feature prominently at the top, but if you scroll down a little bit, you see competing database platforms like Oracle and Teradata, IBM, really anything that has what's called an ODBC connection. You can connect to cube type data sources, so like an analysis services cube. Here are data feeds. The report one is kind of interesting. If you have already a deployment of reporting services reports that you've developed, canned reports for your end users. One of the things with canned reports is a lot of firms end up with hundreds, if not thousands, of reports, and if you closely look at each of the reports, you see that basically they're all a variant of about maybe 10 to 15 to maybe 20, 25 core reports. And the way that happens is you have a report you put together and things are grouped or formatted or sorted a certain way, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, that's a really good report, but wouldn't it be great to also see this or also see that or see it in a different way? And then that spawns another report getting created. Well, the problem with that is then you end up with an unwieldy amount of reports. The beauty of this particular data feed is within reporting services, you can actually get the raw data that went into building that report. So if somebody wants to see it in a different way, let them import it into PowerPivot and just slice and dice their way to the report that they want to see, rather than creating yet another reporting services canned report that's just only going to make you or give you more of a nightmare in terms of maintenance later on. The other feeds is also interesting. This is basically the OData standard. OData, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of a protocol, if you will, for presenting data, intra-application. And what you're able to do here, I'm going to do a demo in a second and show you how I connect it to a SQL Server database. But the beauty of OData is that you're able to see, much like tables and columns in a database are, you can take, it's a web service, but you're able to see data in a very structured way. So if you need to import data from another system, there's potentially an OData feed. If not, you can write one and hook into it that way. And then last but not least, down at the bottom are text files, Excel files. So for example, I was saying earlier, that I can't actually edit the data once it's inside of PowerPivot. But if you were doing some kind of financial analysis and there was a need to create some kind of offsetting transaction, perhaps, you could easily model that inside of Excel and mash it up with your, from your corporate or sort of official data source. Also, side by side, import, the data from an Excel file that has maybe an offsetting transaction or has a view a different way. Another good use of this is if you're doing a financial forecast or maybe planning your goals for next year, or deciding whether or not to maybe realign a territory. You could do all that modeling inside of Excel. You can take corporate data. You can see how historically, this year or last year or the year before, things progressed, and then start to do some what-if analysis and create that model, and then import that and overlay the two on top of each other and see the effects of your plan. So a lot of value in being able to import, both text files and Excel files. Scrolling back up to the top here, just to show you how this data, this particular set of data that I've got in here, made its way in. This is actually inside of a SQL Server database that I have running on this demo machine. And to connect to this, and this only has to be done once, so if you have a crowd that finds this a little bit too intimidating, a little bit too technical, again, going back to the point before, this only has to be done once. Once this is done, then people can search for these queries or views through Power Query. But being able to connect to this database, so the server is here on the same machine, and if I pull down the list of databases, there's my little law firm DB. The next screen here gives me the ability to either proceed by selecting from a list of tables and views in the database to import data, or if I wanted to, I could write a query to grab that data. I'm going to take the easy way out and just proceed by selecting from a list. And here's that list of all the tables. So I've got basically my timesheet information from my fictitious law firm here. We have a table that lists all the clients that we build against, the types of matters, our offices, which are 3 that I mentioned earlier, the different practices that we have. So I can preview data in here, so I can see that our particular firm is a corporate-focused law firm. So I've got a corporate practice, a bankruptcy, a litigation, real estate, and tax practices. And I've got my various staff members and the kind of work that they do. And I've got some views down here. So if I've got, say I select the billing table, I can hit this button, select related tables. Anything coming from the database that's related inside of the database, which oftentimes it will be if it was done right, will be pre-selected here. But I can always unselect it. I could perhaps grab a different view down here. And the friendly name column here enables me, and I can always change this later on by simply just editing it in the PowerPivot window as well, but I could give this a little bit more of a friendly name. So if we're making this as easy as possible for a non-technical audience to work with this, you want to kind of abstract away some of the, maybe technical or IT complexity. Sometimes things are shorthanded just to save the developer a couple of keystrokes. And in this case, it might be better to kind of give them friendly names that anybody without a training manual could pick up and just go to work analyzing the data. So, assuming I wanted to import this, I would just hit finish and it would load the data in. It would actually, it's a pretty quick exercise. I'm going to hit cancel because I already have this data in here and there's no sense in duplicating it. So I'm going to exit out of the wizard. Now, once that data is loaded, I'm able to do a few things with it. We talked about those relationships that came over. So I'm going to switch up here in the view part of the ribbon over to a diagram view. And this gives you the ability to see how these different tables are related, kind of give you a lay of the land visually, if you will. And if there were anything that wasn't connected and I wanted to make a connection, I would simply just take it and drag it over to the connecting table. Just like that, it draws the line and makes the connection. So it's very visual, very easy to see. These connections are also presented underneath the Design tab up here under this idea of relationships. So if I click Manage Relationships, you basically see the written form of every one of these lines that's on here, what table and what column is related to which lookup table and which column there. And if I wanted to add another one here, I could do that by point and clicking through here. But I find the drag and drop with the arrows a little bit more user-friendly, a lot quicker, and definitely fewer clicks than what the relationships window does. Going over to the Advanced tab, another thing we can do, let me just switch back to a data view. But if you look at things like numbers, for example, a rate. Well, in a database, it's just basically a number, a decimal number, as you can see by the data type here. But you could make it a different format, and what that does is basically puts the dollar sign and the 2 decimal points, for example, if we know that this is a form of a currency. Another thing we can do, going back to the advanced tab, is what PowerPivot is it's what's called a cube-like structure. And so what this is doing, or really good at, is aggregating things. And so by default, it's going to want to aggregate anything that it sees as a number. And by default, it's going to default to summing things up. Well, in the case of our average rate, or our rate, it doesn't make sense to sum it up. It makes more sense to potentially average it out. So that we've done that here. We've taken it from sum over to average, just so that whenever we drag this onto the pivot table later on, it's not going to have a tendency to sum. It's going to want to average. Something like revenue, on the other hand, is fine. We want to sum this up so we can see total revenue. Speaking of revenue, this is an example of a calculated column. So you can kind of see it's a little bit darker shade than the rest of the columns here, and that means that this wasn't imported with the data. This column did not exist in the database, this rate times hours, but that's essentially what it is. It is the product of rate times the number of hours for each one of these timesheet entries. And so if we're going to do some analysis, it doesn't make sense for us to try to do mental math or have to calculate this every single time. It's nice to put a column in here that does that. And so we'll just do one on the fly here. The formula is a lot like every other Excel expression that you've written, equal signs, and then you start to type. And as you type, you're going to see that it pops up the same kind of IntelliSense that you have inside of Excel. So the idea here is that anybody that's familiar with Excel, and we said earlier, Excel is kind of, or arguably, the world's favorite BI tool. The idea here is to leverage those skills, make this familiar as possible for end users, so that they're not having to use a different platform. I've seen a number of clients that have spent a lot of money on various BI tools, and at the end of the day, when the consultants leave after they've built the initial set of reports, the end users that own it are left with that sort of dilemma of, well, I can't build anything as fancy as what the consultant built for me, and I'm frustrated, and I just want to export this to Excel. And that's really the idea here, is like you never have to leave Excel. You can do a lot of this analysis and reporting in here. So hours times rate, as I type, you see that it filters it down, and when we hit enter, it's going to produce that calculation that we just did. It defaults it to naming a calculated column and a number after it, depending on how many we have. So let's call this one, let's say Rev2. So we'll remember that it's the one we created in this demo. And then you can see the numbers by default don't have any formatting. It doesn't know that this is a currency. It needs you to tell it. And so we could easily go back to the data type here on the Home tab and change this to a currency. And when we do that, you can see the dollar signs pop out. And when we go and build our pivot table, you'll see how those dollar signs are going to be there by default. So that's kind of a lay of the land inside of PowerPivot. It's fairly simple. It's not meant to be intimidating. We walk through the Home tab where we're getting data. We walk through formatting the data. We looked at the diagram view up here in the upper right. And what's nice about this is, unlike prior ways of doing data crunching inside of Excel, where once you did it, you had, and say you put this away for a while, next month, next quarter, you wanted to do this analysis again. In the old way of Excel, where you were dumping data into Excel worksheets, you would kind of have to walk through this process all over again. You would have to hope and pray that your data formats didn't change, otherwise your formulas would kind of break. And what's really great about PowerPivot is all of these things are typed, they're named. So in this column here, for example, it's called hours. It's always going to be a decimal number. It's always going to have the number of hours, and you can operate on that column just like we did in this calculated column. We multiplied hours times rate. So no more VLOOKUPs based on cell ranges and things like that, if something shifted over would end up breaking. You have a very sort of, or a more structured environment that's a little bit more friendly towards working with data. And all that is important, because then when I do want to come back here after I'm done with this and walked away from it for a while and just simply get the latest, all I have to do is hit refresh or refresh all, and I'll pull in the data. It remembers all the connections, everything that how this table was pulled in is right here. For example, under the Design tab, I hit Table Properties. It's got the connection that it was using. It knows, for example, what query was used, so I could change this query if I wanted to. So you've got a fair amount of control over it, and all that's remembered for you, so that if you want to get the latest data, you either hit refresh in here, or as I'll show you later on when we upload this to SharePoint, SharePoint can actually initiate the refresh and keep the data current. So a huge benefit in that regard. But once we're happy with our PowerPivot model, the thing that we'd want to do next is essentially build a pivot table. So we'll go back into Excel, and as we started the session with this pivot table, we'll just create the same thing on the fly here just to show how easy it is. So we'll go to Insert tab, Pivot Table. It's going to ask me, where's the data? Typically, you use this range of cells or an Excel table. In this case, you're going to click here to use an external data source. However, when you go to choose the connection, when you choose the connection, you're actually connecting to that data model, that PowerPivot data model that's inside of Excel. So there it is on this tab here. Click Open, and you can see it wrote it in. It's this workbook's data model, and that's going to create this pivot table here. And now you see on the right-hand side our pivot table list, and I can prove to you that this is the one we were working on because look, there's that Rev2 column that we just created a few minutes ago. So why not take advantage of that? We'll click it there, add it. So we've got our revenue, and for the 3 years of sample data that we've had in here, it's roughly about $70 million worth of revenue. Let's think about how we'd like to see this data. Let's break it out by office, put that on the rows. Then I think we want to maybe see it by practice, so we drag practice down onto the rows. And you can see it's very responsive. I'm not having to write any more queries. All the hard work was done when those relationships were made inside of that PowerPivot model. Other measures that we'd want to evaluate. So the raw data that we saw was really timesheet entries, hours, rates. A thing that would be valuable perhaps to look at, as we saw in the other pivot table, would be to see the number of matters for a law firm or projects if you're a consulting or engineering or accounting firm that you're working on. And the way that's done is by creating a calculated field. So I'm going to go up here in the PowerPivot tab, and the thing next to data model where we were before is a calculations area. And bringing up these managed calculated fields, I can see I've got a couple created in here. So let's look at unique matters and edit that just to show you how simple this is. We've got a distinct count of matter IDs. So I'm familiar with the data model, so I knew matter IDs is how we track each individual matter in this project at your firm. And we're just doing a distinct count of those. And you can do some formatting down here on the numbers, so we know in the case of matters, you can probably get away with a whole number because you're not going to have fractions of matters that you're working on. Do you want to use a 1,000 separator to make it nice and easy to read? Sure, that sounds great. Let's hit OK. And then the other one is an average rate. However, you can do this a couple different ways. You could actually create an average rate calculation as we've done here, and that's really simply a formula called average of the column rate. And here again you see, okay, we're going to format it as a currency. We got a dollar sign in front of it, 2 decimal places, et cetera, et cetera. But because we did the setup in the PowerPivot model where we told it to summarize and average, it's already going to be doing that for us by default. So let's go ahead now that we've got these two calculations. We can show you the difference here. So rate is right here, and this is the plain old rate from the data source, and you can see that it's average of rate. It's automatically averaging it because of the what we told the PowerPivot model to do, or how to aggregate it. We also have this average rate calculation. This is the one from the calculations tab that we were just in, and it's going to be the same number, but it's less clicks obviously to do it, just to tell it to default by averaging. So rate you always want to average. If you had another kind of measure that maybe sometimes you sum, sometimes you average, then you can create calculations, and you can create as many of those as you want. And the other one is a unique matters count that we created, so we'll drop that in here. And there's the whole number of unique matters that we wanted. Then, what report would be complete if we couldn't filter the data in some sort of way. So again, this was all 3 years worth of data. Let's add a slicer. So a slicer is kind of a new as of Excel 2010, that is, way of filtering the data. So if we wanted to filter, let's say, by work month and work year, we'll add those slicers. And we got here by basically going to Insert tab and then the slicers under the filters area here. And so that pops these up, made a little bit of room for them. We'll put years first. And tuck work month underneath those. And you'll see that these are very interactive. So look into work month. All the 2012 months are selected. If I select 2011, all the 2011 months will be first. Not that the other ones are gone, they're down below further, but they're grayed out and a little bit out of the way, meaning basically like a visual indicator that tells you, you don't need to click on 2012 January or 01 when you have work year filtered on 2011 because you're going to get no data. So I'm able to filter through this and it's able to crunch through. And even if I had a million rows in here, it would be just as responsive as you're seeing here. So let's say that we're happy with this. This is our pivot table, our table of data, a couple of filters. We've got a little bit of a report here around revenue analysis that we could publish and let others take advantage of. So the next Power feature that we want to look at, moving away from PowerPivot now, is PowerView. So I'm going to click this dashboard tab that I had created here. And what we did here is create a revenue dashboard. So same data. Over here on the right-hand side is the same sort of familiar interface that we were using when we were building our pivot table. We have that same, connected to that same data model, again, inside of Excel automatically. So Rev2 that we created together is right there. And what you've got here is 4 charts, a pie chart that basically breaks down the revenue by year. And as I hover over areas on the chart, I can see the pop-ups of that particular value. So in this case, the red is 2012, and the revenue in that year was about 39.3 million. Over here on the right are 2 bar charts. We have our revenue by office and our revenue by practice. And then down here at the bottom, we're keeping an eye on our average rates just to see how it's trending. So across the board, across the company, this is kind of what they call a TV chart. So it's made to look like this is precipitous giant drop from 415 to 410 from 2012 to 2013. And we always want our rates to go up. Our cost of living goes up every year, et cetera. But this is not as dramatic as this is making it out to be. The cool thing about PowerPivot is that it's because of those relationships that we have inside of our models. As you can see here, when I start to click through, I'm filtering on whatever that I click on. So if I click on litigation down here, this is all the numbers for the litigation practice across all offices. If I wanted to see it or I wanted to see main office across all practices, I would click on that. If I wanted to see just 2011 across all offices and across all practices, I could click on that. And what this enables us to do, if we look at by practice, you can kind of see the trends. That one also went up, came back down. Corporate's kind of interesting. Look, they're always heading higher. That's those guys. Litigation, kind of like the rest of the company, headed down a little bit, but it's stabilized. Real estate, kind of a downward trend. And tax, went up and then sort of stabilized. So maybe maybe we need to talk to our partners about real estate. Does it really make sense to keep doing that kind of work, since it's always got these rate pressures on it seems. But anyways, this is a view of the data that, when you're looking at a pivot table, a grid of numbers and text, it's difficult to see these kind of patterns. It's much easier to see this and interact with it and be able to kind of drill into the data this way. Now, the next step here would be to show you how this was put together, because it's actually very, very simple. So I'm going to jump back out into the pivot table, go to the Insert tab, and over here on that Insert tab is in the Reports area is PowerView. This is going to create a new tab inside of Excel called PowerView 2. We could rename it, whatever we want. Dashboard 2. And then to start building our report, we would just we could take our Rev2 measure, we drag it anywhere into the white space. It's going to plot that number there. And then work year. So I dragged work year over, and it's actually doing something interesting that I wanted to demonstrate. So what you're seeing here is a number that obviously is not a year. And the reason this is happening is because, as we talked about earlier, the cube-like structure inside of PowerPivot is going to want to aggregate everything it sees as a number. And it does not make sense to add up every row of every timesheet entry on the year column. So we can easily fix that, though. Go back into PowerPivot. We can find our billing table, find that year column, and just like we showed before on the advanced tab where we told rate to always average, in this case we can tell year, do not summarize. So now this is not going to summarize anymore. And when I go back into our revenue dashboard 2, you'll see in PowerView a message saying that the data model has changed. And when you finish editing the data model, click OK and apply these changes. So we actually have to drop that work year that we had in there and re-add it. But now when we add it back in, you'll see a breakdown by year. So now it's realizing that, okay, he doesn't want me to summarize this. I'm going to group by it instead. So now we have our breakdown by work year of Rev 2. We don't want to look at it as a grid. We could have done that inside of a pivot table. We obviously want to look at it differently. So up here in the upper right, switch visualization, I can very quickly make this a pie chart. One click, I can resize it where it looks good. We can do this exercise again, dropping into any white space on the canvas. There's revenue 2 again. Let's this time maybe do it by our offices. So we'll drag that out. Same sort of effect, the breakdown or grouping by office. And again, we don't want to look at a grid. Let's make a bar chart. So a couple clicks and we've got a bar chart. Rev 2 by office. If I wanted to make another one of these by practice, say, I can just mouse into it, hit Control-C, Control-V, Control copy and paste, and I've got the same thing without doing any additional work. And then I can just simply change the office breakdown to a practice breakdown by dragging practice in here and removing this other one. So now I've got that practice or by practice breakdown. And then we had the line chart at the bottom. That was the last thing. So again, this time we're going to use our rate calculation. You can see it's averaging, not summing, because we told it to, and that's the plain old rate, the one that we told it to aggregate by averaging. There's our average rate calculation, which is the one that was had an actual expression written in. And then work year. So we have it by year. And we want that to be a line chart. And we can resize it. And that's just as easy as it is. And so now I can just start clicking into these and get that same animated sort of effect of filtering. And I didn't have to do any additional work to relate those things. Because again, we did it once. We did it in PowerPivot. Those relationships were established. Those lines we drew in the data model or were imported from our database. Those are being leveraged here, and I don't need to do any additional work to relate this data. So anybody downstream from me, anybody creating any more dashboards, any more reports, never has to worry about that. Just can basically start to look at data and visualize it the way that they need to. So there's our dashboard. Now we're going to be leaving PowerView and moving on into another Power tool called Power Map. So in this case, again, going back to the Insert tab, Power Map is right next to PowerView. We're going to launch Power Map.
Once this opens, it kind of defaults to looking at the U.S. I'm going to hide this left panel just to make things a little bit bigger. Over on the right, though, first thing that this is looking at for us to do is, if you look at the down towards the bottom, is just tell it or choose a geography. And so I know, because I created this data model, I pulled all this data in here, that our client table has states and zip codes and addresses. So that's a good geographical bit of information. So why don't we check off state? If you look at the map of the U.S., it just popped a little dot into each state where we have clients. And what it's doing there is it's putting that dot in the middle of that state, so it's not too precise. I want to go a little bit more precise. I'm going to actually click on zip code instead. And now you see it refreshed, and all of a sudden the dots are a little bit more geographically located to where the client actually is. Since we have a little bit more detail in the zip code, I'm going to just keep that selection, and I'm going to hit next down here. The next thing to select is, what do we want to measure? So what this gives you the ability to do in the type selection first is show something, and when you show something like revenue, perhaps, we'll pick, you can render it by, let's say, columns. So in this case, columns will, and their height will adjust depending on the amount of revenue for that particular zip code. Or I can do bubbles, heat maps, or regions. So let's keep columns selected. The next field says height. So how do we want to control the height? And let's go ahead and just keep going with the revenue theme. And now you can see that the chart animated and the columns got taller based on revenue. And if we just kind of change the perspective here a little bit, we look at this map of the U.S., we see that whatever's going on in the Northwest is a lot taller than the rest of our client base, except for maybe, Miami, but it's just one little tower instead of a bunch. So, if we paid any attention to the data that I was showing in the pivot table, we would have picked up that our main office, which actually is in New York City on the East Coast, was our biggest office. We had smaller offices on the West Coast and down in Miami. Those were the 3 offices. But what this is showing us here is that despite, maybe a concentration of clients scattered throughout the East Coast, serviced by those 2 offices, the majority of our revenue, it looks like, is actually coming from the West Coast. So that's kind of an interesting visualization. I'm going to change the type of visualization over to a heat map real quick, just to show you something different. Now, what you're seeing is the fainter and bluer areas are less revenue, and the deeper red areas, like in the Northwest, are more revenue. And then down here at the very bottom of the right-hand panel is something called time. And what we can add here is anything that measures time. And lucky for me, I've got, years, months, quarters, and even days. So I'm going to go ahead and put days down here. And what this is going to do is animate this over the time that I've got for the data set that I've had. So I showed you before I had 2011, 2012, and some 2013 data. And now if I hit play here, we're going to see that how our revenue basically was generated over that 3-year period. And I'll do that again, and what we'll notice is, like, here at the end, we see that there's some specks of activity in California, but if we play this again, nothing was going on in California until about, I'll say, midway through 2012, which, if I'm running the business, I probably know that maybe we opened the office there, or we gained another client or 2. But it's a nice way to visualize how this revenue has grown over time, and how, California went from nothing up until the middle of 2012, and then became kind of a very dense, red shaded bit of our revenue. So again, ways to visualize your data that you wouldn't have gotten by simply staring at that pivot table that we started with at the beginning. So let's say that I'm happy with what I've done here. I've probably done as much as I can, and maybe I want to share this with other people. So I would then save this Excel file, and I could publish it out to, or save it out to SharePoint. And I can do that one of 2 ways. I can go to Save As and select SharePoint here, or I'll open up my my SharePoint. This is now me in Internet Explorer, so I'm in my web browser, out of Excel now. And I could simply upload it here to this Power BI site by simply going to this Documents area and just doing Upload File. So any way you want to send it up, you can. It's all very easy. I'm not going to redo these steps because it takes only a few seconds, but it's not, something we need to watch. And more so that I've already got the demo workbook already up here, so we'll be able to keep going forward. With the demo workbook, it's called Talon Law. When I uploaded it into this folder, I was able to do a couple of things. I could add it to the featured reports list, which I'll show you is at the top of the edit screen. And I could add it to that Q&A feature that we talked about in the slide deck where, I said, forget about building reports. You can just simply ask questions and the reports get built on the fly. I can also schedule data refreshes, do other things here that you guys can explore on your own by simply just grabbing a trial of Power BI and getting your hands dirty, if you will. Let me click on this real quick just to show you. So I clicked on that file here in SharePoint. I'm still in my web browser, and now it's opening up that Excel web app that we talked about earlier. It's going to open up to that dashboard because I've asked it to open first to the dashboard. It's a better looking sort of first screen to see. And here in the browser, just like we were in Excel, I can click on these things, and they're just as animated and present me that same view of the data that we saw in Excel. And so the idea here is that not everybody needs to have the Excel, acumen or the desire to play around in Excel. Once you basically complete your analysis and you want to share it with other people, they can interface with it through their web browser or on a tablet device as well, through the web browser on tablet. So very portable. I'll click this tab down here over to the pivot. The pivot is the same one like we saw in Excel. So, I could expand or contract the plus sign. I could interface with the slicers and the data does update. The slicers also cascade. Right now it's 2013. The months are showing are 2013. At 2012, the months that are showing are 2012. Oh, I got two filters going at once. Cancel that. There we go. There's 2012. And so the same sort of interactivity and fidelity that you had available to you inside of Excel. The last thing that I want to show you is that Q&A capability that we ended our slide deck with. So I'm going to go over here, click this button, search with Q&A. The idea here is that we no longer need to write reports, and after a while, as we start searching and typing, we no longer need to search and type. We can save some of these queries, and this is a sample data set that came with Power BI about gold medals in Olympics. But these pictures and these boxes that you see on the screen can be replaced by queries that you and I generate. We can add them here, and then other people can just simply click that icon and go right to that data. But just to show you, so you remember our data model here is about our fictitious, 3-office law firm that does corporate law across 5 or 6 practices. We had that billing revenue that we were looking at, and I'm simply typing that into the box, and bam, it's already calculated that, across all the data that I had about $70 million of revenue, and my average rate was $415. Let me just keep typing, because if I wanted to see that by practice type, it's simply going to generate a bar chart for me and show that broken down by each practice type. And I can hover over this bar chart just like we were able to do in Excel and see that that's actually 15.8 for real estate and the 15.8 for litigation. And then those are other practices, so forth and so on. Maybe we want to see this by year. So for practice type in 2011. The numbers update, so they're a little bit smaller now. 50 million for real estate, 5.9 for litigation. If I delete 11 and put 2012, numbers change again, and the chart is updating. Now you might be saying, well, Adam, you're saying I didn't have to build this chart, but I know you built this chart in that Power View that you created. So just to show you, I did not build anything that looked like this. So let's put revenue, comma, average rate on the chart. And what this has done on the fly is generated the scatter plot, which we did not see anywhere in my Excel workbook. And what this is doing is plotting 2 measures, revenue and average average rate on the chart. Average rate is over here on the left-hand side. The millions of revenue are going down the bottom. And our practices are these dots that appear. And what a scatter plot allows you to do is very quickly see, in the upper right is going to be the highest average rate and the most amount of revenue. So that's our litigation cost. These guys are just really doing really well. And I can hover over these and see more details about what's going on. Another thing an attorney or law firm might do is by staff member. Maybe you want to see the top billers report. And so here we go. Pamela is by far, she's probably a partner at the firm because she's bringing in all kinds of revenue, billing her clients. And there's a quick billing, top billers report, basically, that PowerPivot and Power BI generated for me on the fly. So pretty amazing stuff. It was just actually released to the public less than a month ago, so fairly hot off the press technology. But there's certainly a great way to see how the world and these technologies are being leveraged. Technologies like, search engines, everybody's are used to now being applied to the BI world and be able to generate things like this and put it at everybody's fingertips is, I think, very, very promising, very powerful technology.
So just to summarize and wrap up, there's 2 sides of the Power BI umbrella, if you will. The left-hand side was Excel and all those power tools that we went through to be able to pull in data, model it, and then visualize it. And then once we're happy with that, we publish to SharePoint. We're able to share through our Power BI site. The idea here is to make it as unintimidating and as simple and non-technical to get these insights. And then obviously we have to acknowledge the fact that not everybody sits at their desk and does work from their desk all the time. So mobility is a huge component of the equation. So the beauty of it is Power BI is available as a free trial. You can go to powerbi.com as kind of a suggested next step. You can sign up for a free trial. You'll be able to do everything that we did here. And then if you are interested in taking this a step further, it's very easy for us to put together a sample Power BI with your data. And the way you'd start that is by simply emailing us at bi@talon.com.